The future has become a ruins. Under the greedy desire, science and technology has provided unprecedented convenience for mankind, and everything is changing rapidly, including destruction. In just a few decades, human civilization has become a ruins. A group of survivors gathered and struggled in a huge air cage. The cage that imprisons sins has also become the last shelter of mankind. People call such a city a lighthouse. A huge lighthouse needs to consume a lot of energy to maintain its operation. However, this isolated city cannot achieve the goal of self-sufficiency. The hunters must go down to the ground to collect materials. The ground is already full of all kinds of monsters, which is very dangerous. Can hunters really return to the lighthouse safely? The collection team is called the Hunters. Mark is the commander of the Hunters, and the main character. To the surface, every member of the team is nervous. The land has become a desolate place, full of danger. Humans are just like a group of rats looking for foods outside. They walked into a ruins, which was full of huge scratches, and shells of unknown creatures. A spinal insect that looked like a giant scorpionfly suddenly climbed onto a member of team. When the hunters fought back in panic, countless spinal insects were flying around. The release of carnosine spinal insects made one of the team members' spirits fluctuate abnormally. He killed one of the member. But he is pulled into the darkness by the large monsters that appeared. Realized the danger, Captain Mark resolutely assumed the responsibility of protecting everyone. Finally, the others escaped from the ruins safely. On the way back, the motorcade encountered a sandstorm. Mark saw a situation that overturned his cognition. In a sandstorm, there was a vague human figure on the shoulder of a huge monster that was several tens of meters tall. How do humans live in peace with monsters? He temporarily suppressed his shock. Now the most important thing is to go back to the lighthouse, where he may find the answer. Mark led the hunters to the lighthouse successfully. The huge fortress is rising slowly. The monsters on the ground could only look up. This was the last shelter of human beings. Due to the extreme lack of resources and space, the system on the lighthouse went to the other extreme before destruction of civilization. The lighthouse divides people into superiors and ragtags according to their genes. From the moment of birth, one's life has decided. Ragtags can be in grassroots work. They are responsible for providing food and work for superiors. They don't even have the right to have children. Superiors enjoys a carefree life of eating and drinking. Their most important responsibility is to reproduce. This kind of social structure, which is similar to bee colony, seems reasonable and efficient under the condition of extreme lack of resources, but in fact it can never last. People are not insects. At present, the system has not been implemented for long. It is absolutely difficult to maintain after 2 generations. In order to control the need for no work, the superiors, who have no anxiety about survival, established the religious influence light and shadow club to brainwash through faith and let these non-contributing superiors become breeding tools to reproduce for the lighthouse. Pope Charles of the Light and Shadow Society is the son of the current city owner Morgan. Charles walked to the terrace and saw the returning hunters. Both ragtags and superiors cheered loudly to the hunters. Charles looked down at Mark, the famous hunter. He was full of envy. He secretly decided to give Mark a hard time in the next high-level meeting. For the future of the lighthouse, Mark reported everything he saw to the city master, including her. A few hours ago. At this time, the wilderness hunter team had just escaped from the ruin and came to the ground. Numerous spinal insects were chasing after them. In case of emergency. 4068. Get in a piece of mecha in a panic. The wrong operation triggered the limit mode of the mecha, but it was still powerful enough to fight against foreign enemies. Then, other hunters also jumped into the mecha. Captain Mark also drove his favorite combat mecha. Bing Ran acted as a sniper to cover Mark. At this moment, the human finally got the advantage. However, more and more monsters join in, which makes it difficult for the team to retreat. The life and death test of the Wilderness Hunter team has just begun. What fate will await them? A group in front was holding a high-level meeting. Mark's great discovery on the ground caused a heated discussion. At this time, the city master interrupted the discussion. He pretended to take advantage of Mark's many years of campaigning outside, and suppressed the discussion on the grounds that he was too tired to have an illusion. Later, the city leader announced to the people that he would no longer be the city leader. RK would assume the title of city leader, and the ceremony would be held 7 days later. Charles was the first to object. He was so conceited that he naively thought he was the successor of the next city lord. He lost his mind and shouted his father. This sentence also surprised everyone. According to the 3 principles of the lighthouse, father was the name of the old times, and the man in front of him had no relationship with him. Charles, who knew that he was speechless, could not say anything more. So he had to withdraw quietly, and the matter was settled. After the meeting, the city owner left Mark alone. Mark also had many questions about the arrangement of the city lord, because in his mind, there was a more suitable person for the city lord's position. This person was Ko Hong, a strange and familiar name. She was the best commander of the hunters, the most proud student of the city lord, and she is Mark's sister. However, that was the past. The city lord promised Mark that he would tell her everything if he succeeded to the throne in 7 days. When Mark came home, he stared at the picture in his hand, which was the only memory left by. This is an age when people will die if they fall in love. At the end of the day, human beings have abolished all the intimate relationships of the times, and family affection and love are completely prohibited. It is common for fathers and sons broke off their relationship. In order to ensure the optimal gene, human beings have also abolished free love. Once it is found that they will suffer serious punishment, Mark's sister will die because of this. This matter also became Mark's trauma. In order to survive, all ethical principles are obstacles. But is such a human being still human? Back in the bedroom, Mark looked at his sister's picture. At that time, Ko Hong was the commander of the Wilderness Hunters. Even smarter and stronger than Mark. But she was burned because she was in love. The city leader gave the 2 men a last chance, and they would forgive if they confessed their mistakes. She is more willing to die with those he loves than to live numbly. They kissed in the flames, and then disappeared. Mark woke up from his nightmare. The lighthouse has a new day. Today, Mark heard the news that the teacher was going away. The so-called long journey is to save the energy of the lighthouse and banish the elderly to the ground collectively. This is a journey with no return. Teacher is the best instructor in the city. He will not escape the fate in the end. The teacher told Mark that the woman he saw really existed. The woman had just given birth, but the doctor took the child away from him in order to cultivate the best next generation. The lighthouse not only abolished the family, but also required special institutions to raise children. Some pregnant women did not even see their children. The birth of a new life became a simple task. At the same time, the 2 subjects in the lighthouse began to riot. They began to eat people's food crazily, and even the spilled milk did not hesitate to lick it. In the chaos, people found that their bodies had red spots. which was the manifestation of scarlet disease. The ragtag have lost their mind, and attempted to violently resist the law. At this moment, Bridges came to enforce the law. One of the ragtag picked up a gun on the ground, fired and backed away loudly. But the bullet could not pierce the iron armor. The only thing the man hit through was the head of the ragtag beside him. The frightened man immediately lost his ability to move. At this time, the coming law enforcement officer punched the man out. Seeing that, 4068 and his friends rushed to the law enforcers. 4068. Ragtag 2 intended to plead for him, but his reckless behavior violated the lighthouse law again. The law enforcement officer clenched his neck mercilessly, and 4068 was about to be strangled by the law enforcement officer. At this moment, Charles passed by and just witnessed the scene. He was dignified and said to the people that what these people needed was not punishment, but baptism. In this way, the three of them were arrested. People begin to reflect gradually. Is living in this cage-like lighthouse a kind of freedom or a kind of bondage for them? Captain Mark, who woke up from his dream, came back to reality. He packed himself up as usual, and was ready to leave for the ordnance preparation. Now he is already a household name. Mark's succession to the next city leader has also been spread all over the streets. Bing Ran, Chingmo and others who fought with Mark have now become teachers of recruits. At this time, the Black Dragon instructor, who is training recruits, is planning to fight with Captain Mark in order to better show the fighting skills to the soldiers. This ignited the passion of the people. One is an old instructor with rich combat experience, and the other the leader of the most powerful hunter. All the people present stared for fear of missing the wonderful pictures of every second. Suddenly, the teacher covered his chest. Mark stopped at once. Unexpectedly, the teacher suddenly hit Mark with a hook. Then the teacher gave Mark a kick. It turned out that the teacher was demonstrating to Mark what is a struggle to confuse opponents. In the middle of the game, the instructor paused the game, waved his hand and walked slowly out of the court. When people were still wondering, Bing Ran whispered to Mo Ching that the teacher had been placed on the list of travelers because of his age. The so-called travelers, it were just lighthouses to eliminate the older people and expel them to the outside for the reason of their own survival. Although the performance of the old instructor and Mark was ostensibly intended to give a demonstration to the recruits, it was actually the last moment that the teacher and Mark, and what he taught at that moment was people's hearts. Mark, who has been on a mission outside for many years, has little contact with people in the lighthouse. He doesn't know that what is really frightening is not the strange outside the city, but the evil heart under the beautiful appearance. In the end, people always want to look for hope. But if there is hope, is it still called the end? These are a group of old people who are dying. In order to save the resources of the shelter, sacrifice is necessary. They worked all their lives for the lighthouse, and now they have no right to enjoy their old age. Now old people have no value, so they have to die. Although the ceremony of seeing off the old people was magnificent, everyone present knew that they were eliminated human beings. Before leaving, the instructor told Mark that the woman he had seen earlier might not be an illusion. It had recorded useful information in the reference room. The lifting platform falls slowly, and 5 brave men step on the way to death. They can be old, according to the rules of the lighthouse. The city master has reached the age of traveling far away. Why is he unwilling to sacrifice himself for the lighthouse? In order to find out the truth, Mark and Bing Ran came to the reference room. They found a surprising secret. The predecessor of the lighthouse was an air prison. The last survivors of mankind were a group of prisoners. This is also the origin of the exquisite name, the Cage of the Soul. On the record of the 12th year of the lighthouse, the mysterious woman finally appeared. She invaded the lighthouse alone from the ground and killed the whole team of hunter. That is to say, as early as several decades ago, this woman had already lived on the ground, and her appearance is never changed. Just as they were preparing to continue their investigation, the patrolman suddenly arrived. Then they could only hide in the bookshelf. The patrolman succeeded in helping them, which makes Mark and Ranbing almost perform the script plot. In order to investigate more information, Mark wants to find the oldest resident of the lighthouse. Very famous Mark. Mark is wrapped like rice dumplings. He was still recognized by others. The women surrounded him. Boys should protect themselves when they go out alone. After breaking out of the siege, Mark finally found the ragtag, who the most experienced person in the lighthouse, and asked him about the war in the lighthouse 12 years ago. In the record, the lighthouse was obviously invaded in the 12th year, but the old man said that the lighthouse was very peaceful these years. Only once, the hunter led by the city master was besieged by a monster. It was a mysterious armor that fell from the sky and saved his life. The summoner of this armor was the silver-haired girl. In order to express his gratitude, the city master invited him to the lighthouse. But then the silver-haired girl disappeared with the armor. Since then, no one knew where she went. How many secrets did the city master hide? On the other side, Bing Ran saw that all the relics of the hunter's teammates had been removed, and all traces of life had disappeared, as if they had never appeared. A diary fell to the ground. Bing Ran picked it up, and found that there was a record of a teammate's secret love for another team member. Although the lighthouse prohibits love, human nature can never be prohibited. The teammate's love diary reminds Bing Ran, who has never been in love of her. However, at the end of the diary, it was recorded that the teammates were going to the Dawn Hall in order to optimize the gene. The lighthouse would select a pair of men and women to complete the breeding task in the Dawn Hall. The reality is cruel after all. Bing Ran suddenly received the news that she would take over the breeding task performed by her teammates. How should Bing Ran choose? On the other side, two soldiers carried an iron box to the female doctor's studio and ordered the female doctor to start the unknown creature in the iron box. She was also cruel to conduct human experiments on her husband and make a living specimen. After the soldier left, a patrolman handed her a gunny bag containing a living person. What secret does the seemingly peaceful lighthouse hide? This topless man is suffering from a terrible torture. The hot spot directly shines on the man's skin, and the smell of barbecue spreads all around. Charles looked at Ragtag, who is in pain. He suddenly ordered to stop the torture and gave him adequate food. But everything comes at a price. Charles had his own reasons for doing this. On the other side, Bing Ran takes her to look down on the whole lighthouse in order to fulfill her wish for a girl. Suddenly, a violent air current blew, and the girl was in danger, and the glider had been falling. Mark saw that Bing Ran was in trouble and rushed to save people. Bing ran through the girl to Mark, but she couldn't control the direction and fell freely at a height of 10,000 meters. Mark jumped down regardless of the danger. He held Bing Ran and pulled him back to the glider. How sweet it is for them to fly on the ruins. After landing, Bing Ran could no longer control her feelings and confessed her love to Mark, but Mark still chose to refuse. He might love her, but he had too much responsibility on his shoulders and too many corpses at his feet. Bing Ran also knew that love was not important at the moment of the end. She finally told him the news of the Dawn Hall. Mark was shocked, although he was reluctant. It was the task of the lighthouse. It was the duty of the hunter to obey. This building is called the Dawn Hall, where both men and women breed for the lighthouse, light and shadow society disguises the most primitive wild instinct of human nature to be magnificent, and breeding tools will release their enthusiasm and contribution for the prosperity of the lighthouse wholeheartedly. Mark was surrounded by more than a dozen people at the same time. He kept breaking through the encirclement. He kept running in the room. All the people who stopped him on the way were knocked down by him. He was about to reach the end of the room. At this time, a familiar figure appeared in front of him. It was the patrolman with armor in the lighthouse. Mark rushed forward like a dart. His fist was like a bullet in the air, but it bounced back. Mark was about to be knocked down because his opponent's hard armor gave him no advantage. His unconscious mind suddenly showed a picture of being with Bing Ran. With these punches, the armor that was originally invulnerable and could not be break down by bullets was deformed. Mark finally came to his beloved woman. That night, the Dawn Hall was no longer the cry of strangers, but the confession of two people who really loved each other. The news what Mark's intrusion into the Dawn Hall soon spread to the city master. He ordered the arrest of Captain Mark and organized an emergency meeting. The city master looked at Mark in front of him, and he was the one who will took charge of the whole lighthouse. Mark asked the city master whether the lighthouse was fair. The city master was so angry then he fainted. And the medicine that can cure the city master's disease has run out. Only go to the biological company on the most dangerous ground to collect medicine. What would be waiting for the hunters in the most dangerous area? This is a ruin of biotechnology company. As we know, the word biological is definitely not a good word in the movie. Mark and others have just arrived here, and found a large number of grey egg, and strange flowers of emitting fluorescence. The strange flowers emit light, and scream at the same time. The atmosphere of terror filled with biological company. It is full of human skeletons, and the remains of medical robots. Several members of team found a beating heart in a small box. And suddenly a dark shadow passed by, and the heart was also taken away by him. The team members were alert immediately, and all the lights focused on one place. It was a mouse. The barcode on its ear proved that it was the experimental object here. Through step-by-step investigation, we learned that the company had started the research on cell regeneration before the end of the world, and had conducted biological tests on a large number of animals. The reason why the mouse can live so long, it is probably a successful experiment. At this moment, the creepy footage came. The hunter found that a large number of clones person in a room, but each was exactly the same as Mark when he was a child. Is Mark actually a clone? How can be? At the same time, Mark and others found a normal medical robot. The medical robot scanned and analyzed Mark, and found that his telomere was extremely abnormal. Telomere controlled cell division. Once he mastered it, he mastered the secret of immortality. That's why Mark recovered so quickly. What secret is hidden in his body? 1 second the girl was still bickering with her teammates, and the next second, a strange tentacle came out of her mouth, and then she was dragged into the dark. After a scream, there was no sound. At the same time, a strange red soil, zirang, spread rapidly. They only became active when exposed to hemoglobin. You don't have to think about it. It's the ragtag who caused the disaster again. Zirang is like a lightning bolt. Once human bodies touch them, they will be quickly melted. What's more, they can also manipulate those broken robots to make them come alive, and become zombies in iron armor. The soldiers instantly turned into blood inside. They kept running away, and finally broke away from the absorption range of Zirang. Mark's team also successfully destroyed all the monsters. However, when they were ready to evacuate, those strange flowers suddenly flickered, and Spiny Eel, who should have died, unexpectedly quickly regenerated. This speed of resurrection exceeded everyone's expectations. The battle broke out again, and the light of flowers flowed into the ground like rivers. At the gathering place, a fierce beam of light rushed towards the crowd, and his teammates protected Mark with their own lives. People have no time to grieve. Spallation monster jumps up in the dark. Its tail opens, and it blooms fiercely. All the flowers bloom, and the light in the veins becomes more and more dazzling. The number of spiny eels revived is increasing, as long as the Spallation monster is alive. These spiny eels will continue to revive. At first they must beat down the Spallation monster. Everyone concentrated on the Spallation monster. The Spallation monster opened its giant mouth again and sent out deafening sound waves. Spiny Eel danced in the distorted singing, and the life source of the team members was being constantly absorbed. At the critical moment, a member of the team rushed to Spiny Eel, and killed it with its spear. Spallation monster is furious and opens a huge mouth ready to shoot a laser. At this time, the team member took out the grenade and wanted to die with it. But the Spallation monster suddenly slapped him to death with both hands. The Spallation monster not only has extremely strong physical quality, but also surpasses human intelligence. How did Mark face such a powerful enemy? In the face of the giant beast, Mark decided to buy time for the team to leave. The bullets hit Spallation monster. Spallation monster was not hurt at all. At the moment Mark drew the mechanical knife, Spallation monster's palm was firmly nailed to the wall. Spallation monster can't move. Mark seizes the opportunity to attack fiercely. Spallation monster has been hit hard, with all his strength. He pulled out the mechanical knife, and sent Mark flying with one blow. On the roof, Mark finally met the silver-haired woman, Yukoi Bai. Spallation monster tried to swallow him, but it was bombed by a missile. Mark and the monster fell into a deep pit. After this battle, Mark was seriously injured, and unable to move. This was all Charles' plan to get 4068 to kill Mark. Charles in front of his eyes. He took out a ragtag. If he didn't kill Mark, then Charles' anger would be directed at his friend. So 4068 had to do this. The blood was draining, and Mark's consciousness was fading. The last thing he saw that 4068 was running into the darkness, and a spinal insect crawling in front of him. The members of team couldn't believe what they were seeing just then. The Spallation monster crawled out of the ruins. It wasn't dead yet. The spiny eel crowd came round again. They used their special equipment to distract all the monsters. And the others didn't care, because the most important thing is to save Mark. The wound on his neck was bleeding, and in this state, even Mark's resilience was hanging by a thread. It was an unprecedented operation, not only to separate the spinal insect from the patient, but also to ensure that each limb of the spine was perfectly preserved in Mark's body. After removing all of Mark's original spine, Dr. Gali began electrocuting the spinal insect as well. Unexpectedly, the shocked spinal insect began to make human cries. With the constant struggle of the backbone, the fixed backbone of the wire also began to break down. However, Dr. Gali had no intention of stopping the operation and continued to apply pressure. With a flash of sparks, the head of the spinal insect fell to the ground, and the body slowly entered Mark's body and fused with him. The operation was successful. Just when they thought they could finally catch their breath, the fallen head, seemingly sensing the ground monster's call, began to move again, and Mark's vital signs began to fade. Gary tried everything to save him, but he failed to save Mark's life, and finally had to declare Mark dead. The hunters lost their favorite captain, and Bing Ran lost her love. According to protocol, Mark was cremated and everyone present stayed with tears of grief. Mark entered the incinerator with his brothers, who had died in battle. When I was in school, my chemistry teacher told me that heating can speed up the reaction rate of a substance. Sure enough, under the fire, Mark completed the transformation. But strangely, Mark's body began to twist. Unexpectedly, Mark was reborn from the fire and turned into a monster. Lighthouse: The strongest soldier became a monster. The plan was Charles kill Mark is although not successful, but control of the lighthouse has been easy to obtain. He naturally became the acting lord. The new officials must implement some changes. Charles' first step is that the member of Light and Shadow will penetrate into each important post in the lighthouse. Now Mark has become a monster, and the hunters was without a leader. Quarrels are inevitable, but the most painful was Bing Ran. She disbanded the hunters, and put all the responsibilities on her own. Mark has been locked up as a guinea pig for observation. Although he has become a monster, he has not lost his humanity. He still has feelings for the hunters and Bing Ran. As the doctor prepares to investigate further, Charles' henchmen announced to take over Mark, using him as a sitting target, and testing various weapons. The henchmen gave vent to all their usual resentment towards Mark. Mark's body was shot like a honeycomb, but it didn't look weakened. In the process, doctors found that Mark's cells had undergone a radical change, and the speed of endurance recovery was even over far from the monster. Mark's human genetic sequence is no longer like a human when he was born. The doctor was stunned. Since the lighthouse was founded, it had tested everyone's genes. Mark was so special that it was impossible not to find out. The henchman was thinking that Mark was dying, and put his gun to Mark's head, and wanted to kill him thoroughly. Mark suddenly recovered, broke free and went on a killing spree. The images of the past pour into the doctor's mind, and all the plots were finally connected. Not human at all. On the other side, the penalized Bing Ran finally got Charles' permission to allow her to take Mark to travel. Yukoi Bai and others on the ground were observing the lighthouse's every movement. There were still humans on the ground, but there may also be a huge group of people. Mark's teacher also joined them not long ago. Lighthouse are actually the cage of freedom. The end is coming. If the end of the world exists, this could be the worst kind. Monsters are running around the world. The monster grinned wide and smiled his face off, just as it opened its big mouth to eat the Charles. A miracle happened. The masked human raised his hand slightly, and the fierce beasts of the world fell on their knees. All the monsters retreated. Charles looked at the face under the cloak, but there was nothing but emptiness, and that was where the Lord of Light and Shadow came from. The Lord of the City came to the energy room of the lighthouse with Charles. All the energy of lighthouse comes from this weird brain. It can not only provide energy but also predict the future. That was why the lighthouse survived the disaster until now. After that, humans try to use it to deduce the future of human beings. But the brain only gives a pair of symbols and formulas. And the only one that can be interpreted is a coordinate. Humans immediately go to that coordinate, and finally find a baby which is Mark. This was why the city master is desperate to protect the Mark, which exists not to defeat mana ecology, but to build a bridge with it.
你这个老疯子，几颗子弹就能把它打成筛子，任何一头世界兽都能把它撕成碎片，你还指望它窥探什么秘密？我知道，他还没有跨过最后那道边界。
On the other side, an excited man pulled the covering. Once a hero becomes a monster, the residents are stunned. And with the rhythm of light and shadow, there are growing calls for Mark's death.
你们哪一个不是靠它才活到现在？吃的、用的，哪一样不是靠它用命换来的？
Human nature is evil. No matter how hard Mark worked for the lighthouse, but in the face of him now, the only wish of the residents is to have Mark executed on the spot. For fear of infection. The ragtag crashed the guardrail. Countless people fell from the height of 10,000 meters. But they still put the blame on Mark. It was then that 4068, in order to atone. Finally he joined the fight for Mark. Just then, Charles announced Mark's execution. The so-called promise was broken at the touch. Bing Ran burst into tears and was then knocked unconscious by Ragtag with a stick. Mark grasped the head of Charles. It was as easy for him to crush him as crushing a puppy. But Charles still challenged him wildly. He said that the real reason why monsters attack humans is that it is because of the emotion emanating from humans, that the monsters are attracted to devour the lives and souls of humans. After listening to Charles, Mark broke down what he believed was the root cause of the disaster. The only way to save everything now is to work with Charles. Mark wanted to kill Charles. He poked him out in one eye. Suddenly, a boy keeps shooting at Mark. All his friends are dead because of Mark. The man who was supposed to guard the lighthouse becomes the murderer. Ironically, only Charles saw Mark as hope. And his hope became Mark's comfort. In this moment, Mark released his hand, and Charles fell from the lighthouse, but was saved by 4068. What a faithful dog. Then Mark jumped too, intending to end his life. At that moment, the former subordinates caught him.
一直都是被你救，这次老子以死还清啦！
The member of team with his body to buffer for Mark. Two people fell from the sky. The member of wearing a mech survived. Although Mark's body was still alive, his heart was dead. He was like a beast. Began to wander aimlessly. People abandoned some supplies. Restore the balance and live on. In order to reduce the population, lighthouses began to travel. Mothers embrace their dead sons. Others commit suicide. Children search for their former companions. And human emotions erupt. A ray of light dimly filtered through. Wandering Mark attracted the curiosity of other monsters. All of them surrounded him, just as Mark was getting restless. There was a roar, and 1,000 monsters began to move towards the behemoth overhead.